Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. The Dance of the Succubi. Up in the air above the 39th level was the spirit automaton of the damaged fan, in the form of a boy. He had been awake for a while now, but hadn't interfered in any of the previous levels, worried that even increasing the difficulty level wouldn't slow down the shameless Bai Xiaochun. He had been waiting patiently for him to get to the 39th level, which he deemed the best place to gain a victory. The 39th level tested the challenger's determination. There were many aspects to determination. For example, some people would be tempted by profit. Seeing precious materials of heaven and earth laid out in front of them would stir their desires on a deep level. Others could be affected by different temptations. Only someone who had completely severed all of the 7 emotions and 6 sensory pleasures could possibly be unaffected by the 39th level. The women Bai Xiaochun was seeing were only soul projections, given corporeal form by the Tao essence of life and death. However, they had originally come from a very advanced civilization. After all, the void had not always been dark. Before the Great Catastrophe, there had been a matriarchal world ruled by a race called the Succubi. The Succubi were invaders. After taking over another world, they would kill all the women and imprison all the men, whom they would then torment day and night. Before death, a male cultivator's life force would be converted into a soul seed, which the Succubi would then use to propagate their own people. Eventually the Succubus Queen arose, a succubus who achieved unheard of levels of power. With almost no effort, she could cause any living being to be attracted to her on an instinctive level. In the 39th level, the final woman to appear would be veiled, revealing only her sensuous form. And she was the Succubus Queen. As soon as she appeared, Bai Xiaochun felt like he was about to go crazy. Not even his breakup pills could suppress the instincts within him. When the spirit automaton saw Bai Xiaochun's expression changing, he immediately got excited, and couldn't wait to see how things played out. He had been waiting for this level for quite some time, and was looking forward very much to the despair that was surely to come within it. If you fall into her hands a single time, I have my ways of making sure that it happens over and over again. You'll be eternally entrapped by your own desires, and will only come to your senses in the moment before you are killed in body and soul. The boy threw his head back and laughed uproariously. Considering the lesson he had learned with the dark concoctors, he no longer took Bai Xiaochun lightly. Normally speaking, the Succubus Queen would never appear in this level. However, just to be safe, he had adjusted the difficulty to the highest degree. Even then, he had been a bit worried, and had spent a few extra months in slumber to be able to gather the power necessary to push the difficulty level beyond its previous limitations. Because of that, even as Bai Xiaochun was struggling to control himself, the dancing women around him all turned into succubus queens. The power that had drained his determination suddenly appeared 100 times greater than before, and the pink mist writhed as a mysterious force assailed him. His eyes instantly turned bloodshot, and he began to pant heavily. His heart pounded so hard it felt like it might explode from inside his chest. With what little control he still had left, he pulled out all of the breakup pills he had and stuffed them into his mouth. Only by doing that was he able to cool down the immense heat within. Heavens, this is just too hard. He could almost immediately sense that these women were affecting his soul. The desires within him were like a steadily burning flame that never went out. If it had been a chaotic inferno, there might have been less to worry about, as raging flames are usually quickly extinguished. But this steadily burning fire only continued to build in intensity. If he lost control, then he would lose his soul. And he shuddered to think about what would happen in that scenario. He almost considered teleporting out of the level, but then his expression flickered as he realized that the teleportation function wasn't working. Damn it, it's definitely that spirit automaton messing with things. Although consuming all of the breakup pills had cooled him down for a moment, he was more nervous than ever. They're affecting my soul. This place is fundamentally illusory. I'd say there's a high likelihood these women are souls of some sort. Considering that he was a heavenly necromancer, he was 70% certain that his assessment of the situation was correct. If they're souls, then I have plenty of ways to deal with them. He knew time was of the essence, so he quickly produced a soul convergence pill from his bag of holding and threw it out. A popping sound could be heard as it exploded, and although it had some effect on the surrounding souls, it wasn't much. The succubus queens were pulled toward the convergence spot, but then their eyes glittered, and they used some mysterious power within their voices to negate the gravitational force. That caused Bai Xiaochun's heart to pound even harder, but at the same time, it confirmed his theory. They really are souls. He bit his tongue hard to regain some lucidity, then fished through his bag of holding to produce a mask, the same treasured item that had kept his identity hidden during his time in the wildlands. It also would make him invisible to souls in the area. That was the only thing he could think of to do in the moment. As soon as he put the mask on, the succubi stopped dancing, and looked over in confusion to the spot Bai Xiaochun had just occupied. Feeling wonderful, he backed up. However, he knew that although he could hide from the women, he couldn't hide from their power. At the moment, he had only bought himself a little bit of time. Sure enough, the spirit automaton could see exactly what was going on. Drawing upon the power at his disposal, he quickly forced the Succubus Queens to start dancing again, which caused soul fluctuations to roll out in all directions. It's too bad I don't have time to concoct some pills, Bai Xiaochun thought, otherwise I could try to make a more powerful version of my soul convergence pill. Although I don't even have enough ingredients anyway. With that, he racked his brains trying to figure out a way to resolve the situation. Sadly, there were just too many limitations, and the level of difficulty was too high. No matter what ideas he came up with, they didn't seem good enough. As the Succubus Queens danced, he felt his soul stirring, and his heart slowly losing its calm. The heat inside him grew stronger, and soon, not even biting his tongue did anything to help. Damn it, I guess you have to fight the wicked with wickedness. They're just some sexy souls, right? If I have to, I can just call that old ghost out of the Great Sword of the North and let him deal with his own kind. By this point, he was really out of ideas. Quickly pulling out the Great Sword of the North, he sent his divine sense inside and, in the blink of an eye, summoned the quasi-Archean ghost that had once existed on the flag on Ghost Mother's ship. When the ghost face appeared, he looked around in confusion. "Hey old ghost," Bai Xiaochun said. At first, he had assumed he would have to negotiate a bit with the ghost face. But before he could even begin talking, the ghost face shivered, and then his eyes began to shine with unprecedented brightness. Succubi. Heavens. They're actually succubi. I can't believe, they're all succubus queens. This aura. This place has the aura of a Tao essence. At this point, he trembled with incredible anticipation. It's been a long, long time since I've enjoyed the flavor of succubi. The ghost face didn't need any orders from Bai Xiaochun. Like a hungry wolf, he pounced on the nearest succubus queen. Bai Xiaochun was completely stunned, but not as stunned as the spirit automaton was. Only when pushed into a corner did Bai Xiaochun think to fight fire with fire. Furthermore, he made the decision only after some detailed consideration, as well as the understanding of souls that being a heavenly necromancer gave him. Back in his flame-conjuring days, he had seen souls consume each other on numerous occasions, and yet hadn't been completely certain of his new strategy. But when he saw the ghost face's excited expression, and heard his exclamation, he blinked a few times, then breathed a sigh of relief. For a moment, he felt a bit sorry for the succubus souls. This old ghost has probably been hungry for tens of thousands of years. As the ghost face lunged forward with an excited shout, the beautiful, flirtatious succubi looked at him with flashing eyes. Then, instead of fleeing, they actually began to rush toward him and surround him. Bai Xiaochun looked on, stunned, unsure of who was making the first move, the ghost face or the succubi. The group of souls tumbled off into the mists, until they were impossible to see clearly. Excited shrieks and shouts echoed out, leaving Bai Xiaochun bewildered as to what was going on. Can that old ghost handle it? He thought. A moment ago, he had felt sorry for the succubi, but now, he wasn't really sure what to think. As of this moment, he could still feel their power tugging at his soul. Knowing that he couldn't dare to get any closer to them than he already was, he gritted his teeth, sat down cross-legged, and began to focus on meditating, ignoring anything else that was happening. Bai Xiaochun could ignore what was happening, but the spirit automaton could not. He anxiously descended into the mists to see what was happening, and then, didn't come back out. 20 hours passed. Eventually, the ghost face appeared, shivering and looking very pleased with himself. His cultivation base was almost completely back to normal. After returning to Bai Xiaochun, he looked at him for a long moment and briefly considered doing something to him. However, even though he had his cultivation base back, Bai Xiaochun had left a deep shadow on his heart, and after muttering to himself a bit, he decided not to interrupt him. Instead, he floated quietly back into Bai Xiaochun's bag of holding. Next to emerge from the mists was the spirit automaton. His expression was a mixture of fear, disbelief, and shock as he looked over at Bai Xiaochun, and specifically, his bag of holding. Heavens! How could a soul like that even exist? The spirit automaton had apparently suffered an unimaginable blow, and was not able to recover at the moment. Thinking back to what he had witnessed within the mists, he suddenly felt a bit sick. It was in that moment that, without warning, the ghost face floated back out of Bai Xiaochun's bag of holding. Hold on, I need a bit more. Licking his lips, he shot back toward the depths of the mists. The spirit automaton shivered and had to suppress the urge to cry. To most people, this place was a pink hell, but to this old ghost, it was like a holy land. The spirit automaton couldn't help but worry what would happen if the old ghost kept going. He could theoretically wreck the entire level, and completely deplete the bit of the Tao essence of life and death that the sovereign had left behind in it. Damn you, Bai Xiaochun. You shameless cheater. You and everybody you have working for you are all completely and utterly shameless. Gritting his teeth helplessly, he chose to let Bai Xiaochun simply pass the level. Performing a quick incantation gesture, he caused the light of teleportation to spring up. Not daring to wait for even a moment longer, he sent Bai Xiaochun and the old ghost out of the level immediately. As soon as they appeared out on the fan rib, the ghost face looked around in shock, then wailed, "No. I'm not fully recovered yet." Sadly for him, he wasn't able to get back into the level no matter how hard he tried. As for Bai Xiaochun, the fluctuations that had been tugging at his soul vanished as soon as he appeared outside. The heat inside of him faded away, and he opened his eyes to see the ghost face going crazy. At that point, his surprise turned into joy. Ha ha ha, it turns out I really am perfectly pure and clean. That couldn't have gone smoother. Only a genius like me would have thought to fight fire with fire. Even a hard level like that was super easy to pass. Shivering, he looked at the scowling ghost face, and suddenly found him to be much more charming than before. Grabbing him, he put him back into the Greatsword of the North. Of course, the ghost face wasn't particularly happy about that, but because of the slave seal on him, he couldn't even struggle. Looking very pleased, Bai Xiaochun considered the overall situation again, and came to the conclusion that the spirit automaton was probably awake, and that he was the reason why the level had been so dangerous. Assuming that the spirit automaton was currently watching him, he cleared his throat and loudly said, "Hey little automaton, thanks for all your hard work. You know, there's no point in resisting. Just wait until the grand and mighty Lord Bai has thoroughly subjugated you." With that, he sent out a thought, and vanished from the damaged fan. After he was gone, the spirit automaton appeared, utterly discomfited, his face viciously twisted with rage. Clearly, Bai Xiaochun's parting words had been particularly irritating to him. "Shameless cheater, I'm never going to let you reach the end. I swear that next time, I'll definitely destroy you. Destroy you, ya hear? Destroy you." A howl of rage then echoed back and forth in the damaged fan. The spirit automaton had been defeated so many times by Bai Xiaochun that he was being driven crazy. In fact, it was at this point that he started reviewing all of the later levels to try to figure out a way to screw Bai Xiaochun over. Bai Xiaochun had just returned to Misty Sea Prefecture, and already, something unusual was happening not very far away. One of the northern prefectures that bordered Misty Sea Prefecture was Break Prefecture, which was controlled by the Vile Emperor dynasty. On the very edge of Break Prefecture, where it bordered Misty Sea Prefecture, was a county by the name of 9 County. Break Prefecture had a total of 15 counties, 3 of which bordered Misty Sea Prefecture, and this was only one of them. Currently, it was evening, and one would have expected the entire county to be bustling with activity. Instead, the place was deathly silent. There was nothing alive in the entire county, not even a single aura could be detected. Nor could a sound could be heard from animals or cultivators. Furthermore, 9 County was filled with masses of spiderwebs. There was so much spiderweb that the paths leading in and out of the county were completely impassable. Not even divine abilities or magical techniques could destroy the webbing. Any damage done to it was almost immediately repaired. In the northeast corner of 9 County were 2 old men with demigod cultivation bases and somber expressions. This spiderweb showed up 3 days ago, and in only a few days, has filled the entire county. The place is now completely sealed up, except for this spot right in front of us. Presumably, it's very dangerous inside. No one has come out, nor have any messages been received from inside. Should we go in, Brother Chen? Celestial Ghost Mother has given orders for us to go investigate. If we don't go in too far, and only stay for about an hour, we should be fine. We just need to find some clues and then get out. Exchanging a glance, they blurred into motion, carefully entering 9 County. An hour passed, and the 2 demigods were nowhere to be seen. They had disappeared as surely as a clay bowl tossed into the ocean. Except, not even a wave or ripple spread out to give any clue as to what had occurred. There were no fluctuations from magical techniques, and no sounds to be heard. A few more hours passed, and the spiderweb began to spread to cover that final gap through which they had entered. Just when that gap was about to close up, a head popped out from inside. It was none other than one of the old men from earlier, his expression that of terror. "Celestial Ghost Mother, save me," he screamed. Just as he was about to break free from the spiderweb, something grabbed him from behind and dragged him back in. No, then, the gap closed, and the man's scream faded away. Merknine County was now completely sealed. In fact, from a distance, it almost looked like an enormous egg sac. As the egg sac formed, a strange aura began to pulse out from within Merknine County, giving birth to a gray mist. Normally, Gongsun Wanner would have personally come to investigate the events in Merknine County, but she was at a critical juncture in her cultivation, and thus had dispatched the two demigods in her stead. When it became clear that the demigods weren't coming back, she realized that the situation was worse than she had initially thought. At the same time, the gray mist was spreading into Misty Sea Prefecture, leading the Grand Heaven Master and Giant Ghost King to realize that something was going on in the neighboring prefecture. There was some power at work within that mist that cultivators couldn't detect. It turned the lands gray, and even caused crevices to open up. Furthermore, the mist killed anything it touched, even the plants. Misty Sea Prefecture immediately went on high alert, and the Grand Heaven Master personally went to the border to investigate, as did the Giant Ghost King and certain other powerful experts. After seeing the situation personally, they came up with a theory about what was to come. If the mist wasn't brought under control, it would only take half a month for it to cover Misty Sea Prefecture. It was a monumental turn of events. After all, Misty Sea Prefecture was in the middle of rapid development, and if the momentum stalled at this early stage, it could have devastating long-term consequences. It was at this time that Bai Xiaochun returned from the damaged fan, and sent out his divine sense to notify the Grand Heaven Master and Giant Ghost King that he was back. Those two had long since come to realize that he had some mysterious reason for disappearing occasionally. Of course, neither had presumed to ask about it. Once Bai Xiaochun's divine sense touched them, they somberly explained the issue with the mist and Merknine County. The entire county is covered with spiderwebs? And anyone who touches the mist dies. Bai Xiaochun was visibly shocked. Clearly, this was not a small matter, and therefore, the first thing he did was send a report to Saint Emperor City. Not wanting to waste time waiting for a response, and worried about how Misty Sea Prefecture might be negatively affected, he forced himself not to think about how dangerous the situation was, and flew over to check it out personally. Of course, he brought various subordinates with him, including the Grand Heaven Master and Giant Ghost King. Soon, they were near the border of the prefecture, right outside of the expanding gray mist. When Bai Xiaochun saw it, he felt very shaken. What is that stuff? He thought, immediately beginning to curse inwardly. The mist was moving at incredible speed, roughly that of a diva. And his divine sense couldn't penetrate it at all. Back in the Heavenspan realm, he would have simply fled in the face of this level of danger. But now, he was the most powerful expert in Misty Sea Prefecture. How could he possibly run away? Torn about what exactly to do, he gritted his teeth and ordered his subordinates to back up. Then he unleashed all of the power of his cultivation base to surround himself in defensive fashion. Finally, he tried to enter the mist to investigate further. The Giant Ghost King anxiously considered urging Bai Xiaochun not to do something so dangerous. However, considering that the mist was spreading rapidly into Misty Sea Prefecture, both he and the Grand Heaven Master were very worried. He'll be fine, the Grand Heaven Master said quietly. He's a celestial, and he's very cautious. Considering the level of his cultivation base, he shouldn't face anything truly deadly. The Giant Ghost King merely sighed and nodded. And thus, they waited behind as Bai Xiaochun entered the mist. As soon as he entered the mist, he felt something dragging against him, almost as if he were walking through seawater, significantly reducing his speed. Apparently, there was a powerful pressure weighing down everywhere. To his relief, though, his celestial cultivation base made him like a boulder that the seawater could do nothing but flow around. Gaining a bit of confidence, he began to pick up speed, and before long was nearing the source of the mist. Merknine County. His first impression was that it looked like an enormous, webby egg sac. Furthermore, he found the wicked aura it emanated to be profoundly disquieting. Damn it, what exactly is going on here? Trembling in fear, he edged closer to Merknine County, keeping an eye on the dense, impenetrable spiderwebs. Considering how uneasy he felt, he didn't do anything rash, and simply flew along the edge of the county to inspect the webbing. After 6 hours passed, he had almost made a complete circle of the county, but hadn't found any entrances. Eyes flashing, he considered striking at the web to see how strong it was. But that was when his expression flickered, and he turned to look in a different direction in the mists. Gradually, a woman became visible off in the distance, although he couldn't quite see who she was. When she saw Bai Xiaochun, she approached. Soon, she was close enough to make out her face. "Gongsun Wan'er," he said by way of greeting, keeping his voice down. "1. Bai Xiaochun," she replied. Soon she was right in front of him. Obviously, there was no need for an explanation of why the both of them were here. Considering how bizarre things were at the moment, Bai Xiaochun was actually happy to have Gongsun Wan'er around. Not wasting any time on small talk, he quickly went on to tell her everything he knew. This mist is expanding with the speed of a diva, corrodes the land it covers, and sucks the life force out of anything it touches. The strangest thing is that it extracts life force by teleporting it away, or at least, by using something that resembles a teleportation. This web is one huge structure with no entrances. I haven't unleashed any attacks to test it, but I'm guessing that any divine abilities used against it will provoke some sort of response. If we hit it hard enough, maybe we could get through in one shot. Otherwise, it will probably take a long time to get through. Gongsun Wan'er took a moment to digest all the information, then went on to tell Bai Xiaochun a few things she had come to discover. Lowering her voice, she said, 2 days ago, I sent 2 demigods here to investigate. Back then, the webbing hadn't yet formed into a single structure, and there were ways to get in. However, after the demigods went inside, I never heard from them again. Furthermore, this mist is transforming. I suspect that within 3 days, it will be expanding at the speed of a demigod. And that's probably not its full limit. Bai Xiaochun was visibly shocked by this. The two of them exchanged a glance. Obviously, there was no time to sit around waiting for either the Vile Emperor dynasty or the Saint Emperor dynasty to send reinforcements. They had to do something immediately. There were few options. Bai Xiaochun gritted his teeth, and Gongsun Wan'er's eyes flashed with determination. If Gongsun Wan'er had been on her own, she wouldn't have been willing to face the danger. But considering they were celestials, there were few places in the eternal immortal domains that they could not go. They discussed the particulars and came up with a simple plan, and then drew upon the powers of their cultivation bases. Booms rang out as divine abilities were unleashed, striking one particular spot on the webbing. A shockwave blasted out in all directions, and the web rippled, seemingly standing up to the power of the combined attack. But the web barrier had only been erected recently, and Bai Xiaochun and Gongsun Wan'er were celestials with matchlessly powerful divine abilities. A moment later, the web shuddered, and a hole opened up. Instantly, vast quantities of grey mist poured out of the hole, which began to close up the moment it opened. "Go," Gongsun Wan'er said, blurring into motion to enter the hole. Bai Xiaochun suppressed his unease, braced himself, and followed. Only about 10 breaths of time after Bai Xiaochun and Gongsun Wan'er entered the web, the hole closed up behind them. Not even the slightest mark remained behind to indicate that it had once existed there. Now, they were separated from the larger world outside. Inside of the enormous webby chrysalis, Bai Xiaochun and Gongsun Wan'er had very serious expressions on their faces. Currently, they stood on a vast plain. There were no plants visible, nor any mountains. Even the land was parched and cracked, and seemingly devoid of any life force. In fact, other than the drifting mists, it didn't contain anything. Gongsun Wan'er looked around quietly, then pointed off into the distance. "Last time I was in Murknine County, I passed by this area, and I distinctly remember there being a mountain range over there." Bai Xiaochun looked at the area toward which Gongsun Wan'er was pointing and saw absolutely nothing. The two of them exchanged a glance, and both could see the fear and bewilderment in each other's eyes. "Interesting," Gongsun Wan'er said. "There aren't many things in the eternal immortal domains that can be disturbing to celestials like us. A few days ago, Murknine County was the same as ever, only to suddenly become like this. As far as I can remember, nothing like this has ever happened before." Eyes flickering, she sent some divine sense out. Being the domineering person she was, she did nothing to conceal her presence, and even unleashed the power of her cultivation base, announcing to any entities within Murknine County that she had arrived. Of course, Bai Xiaochun's personality was very different. Squatting down, he scooped up a handful of soil. It almost felt like nothing more than ash. He blew on it, and it dispersed into the air. Everything as far as the eye could see was the same, covered with layer upon layer of ash. "This is even worse than the areas outside that the mists have covered," he murmured. Gongsun Wan'er retracted her divine sense, a frown on her face. Strangely, after sending her divine sense out past a certain level, she was unable to retract it, and was forced to simply dispel it. Performing an incantation gesture with her right hand, she reached up and touched her forehead, then sent out some more divine sense. "There's a village up ahead," she said. Something's alive there, but my divine sense can't enter the area, so it's hard to say what. With that, she blurred into motion. As for Bai Xiaochun, he suppressed his unease, took a deep breath, and followed her. Everything was absolutely still and quiet, without even the hint of any wind. Strangely, it wasn't very dark, as the webby chrysalis which made up the sky actually glowed with bright light. Although mortals wouldn't be able to see it, considering the level of Bai Xiaochun and Gongsun Wanner's cultivation bases, they were able to see everything very clearly. They moved with speed that vastly surpassed demigods. In overall size, Merknine County was actually about the same size as the Heavenspan realm, but at their current speed, it only took an incense stick's worth of time before they saw the village up ahead. In the past, the village might not have been very eye-catching, but now, it most certainly was. Absolutely nothing existed around it other than ash. In contrast, the village was perfectly preserved, and there even appeared to be lamps flickering, and smoke rising up into the air from chimneys. That only served to make Bai Xiaochun more uneasy. However, no sensation of crisis arose within him as he and Gongsun Wanner sped closer and closer. They stopped outside of the village, and as they did, the sound of a young girl laughing suddenly drifted out into the silence. Hee hee hee. The sudden laughter caused Bai Xiaochun and Gongsun Wanner's expressions to flicker. What was even stranger was that the laughter continued on without cease. Eventually, Gongsun Wanner snorted coldly. Who dares to try to act spooky in front of me? A mysterious, ghostly fire sprang up in her eyes as she flew into the village. Now that Bai Xiaochun thought about it, all other types of ghostly beings paled in comparison to Ghost Mother. Calming down a bit, he headed into the village after her. It wasn't very large, only enough to fit about 100 households. The streets were clean, very different from the dusty world beyond its borders. There were even many lights twinkling in the windows of the buildings. But then Bai Xiaochun sent some divine sense out, and realized that he couldn't sense any actual living beings. His face sank a bit. Gongsun Wanner began to push open some of the doors of the buildings, and soon found that they were completely unoccupied. Some of the tables were set with food, but no one sat at them to eat it. If that were all there were to it, it might not be a big deal. But the endless laughter of that girl continued to assail their ears. And even after entering the village itself, it was impossible to ascertain its source. It was as if it existed everywhere at once. Divine sense couldn't even determine its general origin, much less find the girl herself. Even more unsettling was that the laughter began to come faster and faster, until it caused a sense of impending crisis in Bai Xiaochun's heart. Then, with no warning whatsoever, it ceased. Before Bai Xiaochun and Gongsun Wanner could look around to investigate, the same girl's voice could be heard again. But this time, she wasn't laughing, she was crying. Her sobs were filled with bitterness, despair, and even madness, and were far louder than the laughter had been. At that point, the previously still Merknine County was suddenly filled with a gale-force wind. Sounds like muffled thunder filled the air, which was now filled with endless ash and grit. At that point, a hair-raising feeling of danger rose up in Bai Xiaochun. Gongsun Wanner, you're Ghost Mother, right? Can't you hurry up and find whatever ghosts are around here? At that point he turned to look at her, only to find that she had vanished. His heart immediately began to pound. Considering the level of his cultivation base, if Gongsun Wanner had left the area, he should have been able to tell. And yet, she was nowhere to be seen. This place is too creepy, he thought. Gongsun Wanner couldn't have left, which means there's only one thing that could have happened. There must be a spell formation here that causes space to overlap. He quickly sent his divine sense out again, simultaneously slapping his bag of holding to produce a 15-colored flame. Even as the light of the flame illuminated the area, he threw it down at the ground. A massive explosion ensued, much like when a drop of water is thrown into a vat of boiling oil. Flame rippled out in all directions, ripping away at something that was like a veil of concealment. As that happened, Gongsun Wanner became visible. She looked shocked, but at the same time, relieved to see Bai Xiaochun. Meanwhile, the explosion of the 15-colored flame engulfed the village, causing many of the buildings to dissolve into ashes, and leaving Bai Xiaochun and Gongsun Wanner within a raging sea of fire. Even as the fire burned, the weeping continued. However, as the roughly 100 houses in the village were burned to the ground, Bai Xiaochun realized that in the second story of one of the buildings was a wooden cot. Laying on that cot was a marionette, who was looking at Bai Xiaochun, and weeping. As the fire consumed the marionette, its wailing battered Bai Xiaochun's ears, causing his heart to fill with indescribable coldness. Perhaps it was because he had been attuned to danger from a very young age. Or perhaps it was because of his dream of living forever. Either way, his ability to sense impending danger had improved throughout his years of cultivation, and had always surpassed cultivators in the same level as himself. And right now, his intuition was telling him that something was very, very wrong in Murknine County. Even as his heart sank, Gongsun Wanner looked over and said in a hoarse voice, "There's no ghost chi here. That marionette is not a ghostly soul." Although she didn't have Bai Xiaochun's intuition, as Ghost Mother, she was innately attuned to matters of ghosts and souls. More precisely, it isn't a complete ghostly soul. I can actually sense a soul linkage on it, and the source is in that direction. She pointed off into the distance, then looked over at Bai Xiaochun. Although she didn't say anything more, her intention was clear. They had two choices. One was to leave, and wait for other celestials from the two dynasties to come help, or perhaps even the Archean emperors. The other option was to go investigate on their own, and try to resolve the issue. The former was the safest of the two decisions. Unfortunately, neither Gongsun Wanner nor Bai Xiaochun had the luxury of time. Bai Xiaochun wasn't sure whether Gongsun Wanner would be willing to give up her place in the north, but he did know that if he didn't resolve this situation, then he might as well forget about turning Misty Sea Prefecture into a beacon of hope for the people of Heavenspan. Frowning slightly, he blurred into motion in the direction Gongsun Wanner had pointed out. Gongsun Wanner didn't hesitate to follow. After winning the struggle over the true form of Ghost Mother, she had lost the trust of the vile emperor. Her entire purpose in coming to the north of the second immortal domain was to try to win back that trust. If she didn't join Bai Xiaochun, she would be throwing away all of the progress she had already made. Therefore, she made the same decision he did. The more they flew along, the more unsightly their expressions became. Even after flying for some time, they never saw a single person. Everything was gray, with no plant life or mountains. Nothing. They saw towns and villages, but most seemed devoid of life. A few times, mysterious voices floated out from within a location they passed. Presumably, those places were similar to the first village they had encountered. And thus, they proceeded along in silence and vigilance. Eventually, a city appeared up ahead. It was none other than the capital of Murknine County. "This is the source of the soul linkage," Gongsun Wanner said. "I just can't tell exactly where it is." Both of them sent their divine sense out to check out the location, and when they did, their faces fell. What they saw was very different from the towns and villages they had seen up to this point. There were living cultivators in the city, except they were trudging around the streets and alleys like the Walking Dead. Even more odd was that many people in the city were constantly eating food as they ambled along. Most shocking was that some people had apparently finished eating their food, and had begun to devour their own fingers and hands. It was as if they were starving. When Bai Xiaochun and Gongsun Wanner saw that, they accelerated until they were in midair above the city, where they could observe the situation with physical sight. After a moment, Bai Xiaochun flew down and landed on one of the streets of the city. In front of him he saw a core formation cultivator, a woman who was slowly devouring her finger. Blood dripped down her arm, but she didn't seem to notice. She was apparently so starving that the only thing she cared about was eating. Shaken, Bai Xiaochun reached out and put his right hand onto the woman's head, then sent some divine sense inside her. He wanted to see for himself what had happened, and confirm his speculations about the matter. As he searched the woman's mind, his expression grew grimmer and grimmer. Meanwhile, Gongsun Wanner had landed on the ground too, and was similarly searching through the mind of another cultivator. When they were done, they exchanged a glance, then quickly recounted to each other everything they had learned. Nothing odd, still conscious and aware, just muddled, no signs of being controlled? They're acting on instinct alone? Their life force is slowly being drained away. Unfortunately, neither of them had any idea how to solve the problem. Everything that was happening was truly strange. At one point, Gongsun Wanner reached out and grabbed a nascent soul cultivator, then bound his hands up. The man struggled for a bit, and when he realized he couldn't reach his arms, began chewing on his lip until blood ran down his chin. Both Gongsun Wanner and Bai Xiaochun looked grimmer than ever. Gongsun Wanner unbound the nascent soul cultivator, and Bai Xiaochun continued onward. Gongsun Wanner looked around, then followed Bai Xiaochun. Right now, the safest thing for the both of them was to stick together. With each moment that passed, they felt more and more shaken by what they saw. They almost felt like they weren't in the eternal immortal domains anymore. Everyone around them was completely focused on eating, and some of them even had bloated bellies from it. It was only those who had bloated bellies that seemed capable of coming to their senses to some degree. At one point, they caught sight of someone off in the distance with an exaggeratedly bloated belly. He was an old man who lay on the ground, so stuffed he couldn't move. His eyes shone with terror and despair, indicating that he was at least somewhat lucid. When he noticed Bai Xiaochun and Gongsun Wanner, he shivered and managed to gather enough energy to call out to them. Celestial, save me. That old man was one of the two demigods Gongsun Wanner had dispatched to investigate Merknine County. When Gongsun Wanner realized who the old man was, she hurried toward him, followed by Bai Xiaochun. However, before they could get very close, the man's face twisted as if with pain, and he screamed at the top of his lungs. Then, his belly exploded. Blood and gore splattered out in all directions, along with a host of innumerable, colorful spiders that had human faces. Bai Xiaochun's eyes flickered. Suppressing the revolting feeling that swept through him, he performed an incantation gesture with his right hand and waved his finger through the air. The grim-faced Gongsun Wanner also unleashed an attack. When two celestials joined together to unleash an attack, it was like a destructive tempest. Winds screamed as the spiders began to collapse, unleashing unsettling screams as they did. As the screams of the spiders echoed out, everyone else in the city shivered, then stopped eating and turned to look at Bai Xiaochun and Gongsun Wanner. Pained expressions could be seen on their faces as they howled, their bellies bulging. Then, one by one, they began to explode. A horde of countless spiders appeared, filling the city, pouring over everything as they raced madly toward Bai Xiaochun and Gongsun Wanner. The lands quaked due to the sheer numbers involved. Shocked, both Bai Xiaochun and Gongsun Wanner flew up into the air and looked down at the city, which now looked as though it had been covered by a colorful, writhing blanket. It was a ghastly and horrible sight. All of the spiders emanated Foundation establishment auras. Although individually they were completely insignificant to Celestials, there were just too many of them. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.